And I'm talking with Dr. David M. Jacobs, who's been long researching alien abductions and the phenomenon of aliens. And Dr. Dr. Jacobs, what interests me about you and your research is that you come at it as a history professor. Now, with your background knowledge of history, does it indicate to you historical references and in mythology throughout history and in ancient history that there was a pattern of what could be interpreted as alien contact with various civilizations that seem to have strikingly similar mythology about sky gods, Doctor?
Well, I think that the key event here, the key word is mythology. I have found in my own research no serious concepts of actual aliens, if I may say so, coming down here and doing what we would expect them to do, which would be to talk with the people and to do this and that and see what's happening here and all that. That does not, that there's been all sorts of people, even serious UFO research people, who have tried to show that ancient aliens exist. I have found their evidence to be weak, shall we say. And we'll never know. It's just not knowable. And so the best thing to do is to say, well, it's very interesting, but it does not square with the modern UFO phenomenon. And this is what we have to look at more than anything else.
What is your take on the modern phenomenon? Does it exist, in your opinion?
Yes. It first, we don't know when it started. My best guess is it started probably in the last quarter of the 19th century, where something called mystery airships were flying around.
Right, right.
And, this was before the Wright brothers. And it started in the United States, I think. Now I have to remember these days. My memory is not what it used to be.
Right, but there are archived newspaper accounts, various reports of these events, correct?
There are indeed. In my very first book, The UFO Controversy in America, I started out with that. I talked about that, and that people were seeing real things. There were real articles in the papers, and it corresponded with what we know now about this phenomenon, about the phenomenon that we know today. Not completely, not totally, but infinitely more, infinitely better than ancient aliens. That didn't quite jive with anything that we know of.
What do you make of the start date of all this? You say it was early or in the mid last century or the beginning
last quarter of the 19th century.
Uh-huh.
And there were, as I said, there were these mystery airships in quotes that were people were seeing all over the country.
Right.
And there were lots of articles about it. People were reporting them and as best they could. When there were drawings of these objects, they almost always looked like balloons with passengers on the bottom of them, like people thought of in those days. Mm-hmm. So they couldn't quite get their minds around what they were seeing. But a lot of people were seeing things that struck a chord.
Right.
Now, having said that, there are more sightings of these objects starting in the early 19th century, early 20th century rather, that didn't make the news so much. And people were starting to be abducted by aliens, starting probably in that period. We will never know that either, other than the fact that my colleague Bud Hopkins and I, Bud is now deceased, dealt with people who had had abductions all their lives, starting when they were children in the 1920s. So that my guess is that their mother or their father was an abductee, which is how it works, and that probably went back to the 19th century. See what I mean? You just have to do this by what little we know about how this thing works. But it's logical. And it has been with us. And when I say us, I mean people around the world uh, um, for most of the 20th, for all of the 20th century, I should say, if not most of it, and maybe even in the last part of the 19th century.
Now, go ahead, Doctor.
Well, we don't know anything about the last part of the 19th century because everybody is dead.
Yeah.
So,
But do you draw any conclusions about the timing, when it began and why it seems to be more of it now? Has something to do with more technology or?
no, it's more of it now because let me begin from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
At one time on Earth, there were no abductions and no aliens. When a certain kind of alien came, they transmitted, they threw away around the world some sort of brain, something that would attach to a person's mind or brain, if that's not the same thing. And the people who inhaled, let's just say, because we know very little about this, but we know enough to make this argument. The people who it attached to, and it wasn't everybody, it was just a small percentage of the population. The people that this stuff attached to became abductees. Not all of them, but many of them, if not most. When that person, male or female, married a male or female and had 9 children, all 9 children would be abductees. And when they grew up and married non-abductees, all their children would be abductees. So it continues to come up to grow in a sense, although the population is growing, but it grows even at a greater speed, at a greater rate, I think, because all you need is one person to have 3 children or 5 children, whatever it is, and it grows that way. That we've seen early on, that we know about early on.
So what they are doing is they're creating a new form of human, a hybrid?
Well, of course, we didn't know when we started doing research into this subject, we knew absolutely nothing about it whatsoever, other than that it might be here. And people were saying they were being abducted. And even then, like the Barney and Betty Hill case, 1961, or the case in 1957 in Brazil, what's his name? I can't remember now. They were aware that something was happening to them. With Barney and Betty Hill, they were not chosen at random. A UFO was not behind them or off the road when they were driving down from Canada to New Hampshire. This was not just they happened to meet a UFO. So the question then is, known about this phenomenon as abductions,
Right.
starting in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. Nobody did anything about it then because it sounded just plain too crazy.
Right. No, but you say now with Barney and Betty Hill, the original report of an abductee in modern times, you say it was not random. Why not?
Because Barney and Betty Hill had this, whatever was put into the atmosphere. And that allows these beings to zone in on whoever is an abductee, as opposed to random people. Every once in a while, random people will be abducted. Let's just say a car full of people stopped on the side of the road. They'll bring up the car, and there's an abductee on board. They take the abductee, they do this, that, this, that, this, that. The people in the car are their heads down, sleeping. They then put the guy back in the car, bring him back down, and everybody wakes up and they say, oh, did you see that thing outside? There was something coming down towards us. Wow, that was amazing.
Right.
Having no knowledge of what just happened or memory of it. That is standard fare.
Professor, Professor, what is the purpose of all this, and is it nefarious?
This is an excellent question. I've written 3 books that led to, beginning with the sense that I had was that they're examining us, they're learning about us, they're trying to understand how we work and this and that. That turned out not to be true. In the second book I wrote, I was much more clear on what was happening, and all I knew was that these aliens were saying, soon we'll all be together. Soon everyone will know his place. Soon. So I would ask an abductee, well, what do they mean by soon? Like now or like a million years from now? What do they mean by soon? Nobody knew. Now, if this was just something developed out of a person's brain, well, they'd say, well, by the year 1999, or something like that. Nobody knew. It was not knowable. My last book was
Walking Among Us?
Oh, I know the title. I'm just trying to think of how kind of crazy it is when I even think about what I've written.
Uh-huh.
But this is people who don't know other people who are saying the same thing and who are embarrassed to say it. And that is that these beings look human. And there's a whole lot of backstory on how they get to look human on board, which I talked about. And ones who are gotten rid of because they're too tall or too short or whatever. And then they come down, and abductees teach them how to live here. What is a quart of milk? How do you, what kind of stores, what do stores do? What's in a store? A whole range of things to treat these people to just live among us, to my utter shamefulness.
Why?
I can only guess at that. They don't say why. But I do think that this is a planetary situation. This is not an American phenomenon by any means, shape, or form. This is a global phenomenon. And everything is fine. They're just regular human beings. All these people who are being produced are regular human beings. They come down here around age 17, 18, and maybe a little bit older. They learn how to go shopping. They learn how to put a shirt on, all that, whatever it is. Everything is fine except for one thing. All of them and all gray aliens and everybody in between can do one thing that we cannot do. All of them. They can control human beings and we cannot. They can control brains. They can put ideas in people's heads. They can take ideas away from people's heads. They do all sorts of things like that. And that is around the world. You have to understand, this is not an American phenomenon. I can't keep saying that, but I have to point out that people write to me saying these things that are happening to them and have no knowledge that other people are saying the same thing. And it ain't in the movies.
Doctor, does the government know?
UFO researchers have been battling the government for years and years and years and years. I have not been battling the government. I've been learning about the phenomenon. My best guess is that there might be some people in the government who know. Are they fully aware of what is happening and the aspects of it that have this sort of seriousness to them that is beyond imagination? I don't think so. I think they still think that they are flying saucers with aliens in them, and they are, like in my first book, trying to fly around and see what makes us tick, or just because that's what they're doing, because they're interested. But the answer to that is not that, unfortunately. I wish it was that. As I said in my first book, I thought it was. The evidence did not show that.
Okay, so what you're saying is that you know what it's not, but you know what it is, what the purpose is, what the design is, what the final result may be.
No. And the reason I say no is because they don't say anything to abductees other than everybody's going to love it. It's going to be wonderful. Everyone will know his place. That's it.
Doctor, I have to ask you this, and I'm not saying this in any kind of a critical way, but you come from an academic background.
You'd be the first then. You'd be the first.
You come from an academic background, Temple University. You have bona fide credentials. How does the academic community or colleagues react to all this?
Well, I'll tell you, I retired from Temple in 2011. I taught for 36 years there. And in those 36 years, only one person came to my office to talk about the abduction phenomenon because the person had seen a UFO very close and he was interested. All the rest of the people at Temple University, all the other teachers there, basically, saw that I was getting an enormous amount of publicity. Page 1 of the Philadelphia Inquirer, Philadelphia Magazine. I was on hundreds of radio and television shows, and this is as we come up to the modern times, so to speak. Not a single person at Temple University came to my office and said, "David, what's the matter with you? What are you, crazy or something like that? You're giving Temple a bad name. Why are you doing this?" Not a single one.
Well, that was a surprise in itself, wasn't it?
I haven't finished. They were plotting against me to try to figure out ways to get rid of me. And the reason I know that is because somebody sent me in their emails to each other. And so, but I had tenure, which means I could not be fired, and we had a union. So I stayed as long as I wanted. But here's the problem. In academics, you are an assistant professor when you come in, which means that you sign a voucher saying that you will teach for 3 years or 5 years or whatever it is, and you can be thrown out at any time when it's up. If you get tenure, then you're called an associate professor, and they cannot fire you. As long as you're doing things that are not criminal or whatever, you can't be thrown out. The last one is just plain professor. It's called full professor. There's no assistant, no associate. And that is if you have written a bunch of books and everybody loves you, and et cetera, et cetera. I knew when I started doing abduction research that I would never make full. That was never going to happen. And in fact, I was associate professor. They couldn't get rid of me. And I stayed the whole time, never made full, even though I published books with legitimate presses and, just like everybody else. But I knew that was going to happen. I understood that. And this was too important for me to say, no, I'd rather be full professor.
So you have no regrets?
None, zero. I'm happy that Temple allowed me to stay, even though they had to.
So if you had to do it all over again, obviously you would do it all over again. But why? Are you trying to warn the public? Are you just trying to enlighten the public? What is your purpose for being so adamant about getting this message out of your research?
I don't really know. I got interested in the subject when I was a lot younger, and it just kind of caught on with me, and I started reading it a little bit, and then I read one awful book after another, not understanding that they were awful, and then the more I learned, the more I realized, these first guys that I read were off their keisters or whatever. But the fact is, though, that it just entranced me, and I don't know why or how. I just got really, really interested in it. It seemed like it was the most important thing that ever happened in the history of humanity. one can say. But I just stuck with it. And the more I did research into it, the more interesting it got. It wasn't fading away in any way.
You and Bud Hopkins were friends. Did you share data when he passed away? Did he give you any data before he passed away that you now have access to and perhaps would share with us or with someone?
Not really, because everything that he found, I was finding. Everything I found, he was finding. It's all the same. We were right on the same level of knowledge about the subject. I have all of Bud Hopkins' material, and I will be giving it to the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia, along with all of my material, very, very soon.
Can you be assured that they will accept these materials and your research and preserve them?
They've already said yes.
Let me ask you this. With the proliferation of television shows and other media outlets, Ancient Aliens, not just Ancient Aliens, but UFOs in general, the public interest has been raised and perhaps some of the awareness and understanding. But because a lot of it is tabloid, because by the very nature, it's easy to sensationalize this subject, is the proliferation of shows a service or a disservice to serious researchers such as yourself who are trying to show people that this isn't really just a lot of hocus pocus and hooey, that there's something to it? So are these shows helping or hurting that cause?
I don't really know the answer to that. I think that it's probably hurting it because most of them, from what I can tell, and I must say I don't watch most of them, but the aliens are not as clever, as smart. They don't seem to have the same ability to draw out what aliens are actually like. I may be wrong about that.
Uh-huh.
But this phenomenon is, I think this phenomenon, if I may just veer a little bit off, I think it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. I think they're here for a reason. I don't think that they're doing what they're doing just because they're having fun. And I think that eventually we will see that this is, as I said before, a kind of a takeover situation. Therefore, what has happened is what people have been describing to me has changed over the years, not knowing once again that other people are saying the same thing. And that strikes me as frightening.
So you still don't know whether it would be a benevolent takeover or something that would be destructive.
I do not know absolutely positively. If I were to guess, I would say this is not good for humans. The reason is that all human-like aliens, if I may use that phrase, who people have reported on board and who are starting to come down here, which is all in my last book, they are exactly human in every conceivable way, except the fact that they can control a person's thoughts and we cannot control them. It doesn't seem like that's much, but that makes them a better species in a way. It makes us second class, makes them first class. I don't like that. I want to be first class and have them second class.
Well, this kind of gets into perhaps some kind of a religious aspect. There are those who believe that the aliens are actually demons, and actually, if you utter the name of Jesus in front of these demons, that they're frightened away by it. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I've worked with people who are priests and ministers and people of different religions, but priests and ministers themselves who are abductees. Should I say any more?
And what is their conclusion from that experience?
Same as everybody else's. It doesn't matter. They still think things are beings from somewhere else. They're taking them against their will or doing this, that, this. It's all the same. If it was drastically different here, there, and everywhere, we wouldn't be talking, and I would be full professor.
So you think that there is a timeline here? There was a beginning, a middle, and we're coming to an end. How soon? How soon, and how will it end?
Don't know. It's not knowable. They don't tell that to abductees, and therefore abductees don't tell it to me. I've stopped doing research into the subject. Well, I'm working with one last person, but I want to watch television for the rest of my life and nothing else. But all I know is that I don't care so much about myself, but I have two sons, and I worry about what life is going to be like when they're older. They're already in their 20s and 30s, but I worry about that. Saying these things, I remember when I first started doing research into this, and even when I wrote my first book, I never imagined that it would lead to what I'm telling you now. It was just not in my brain or my concept, the way I looked at it. It was just something that they were interested in us, and they were finding out about us, human stuff, in other words. But this turned out not to be that way, and I don't like it.
If before you embarked upon this research and you knew or met somebody like you are now, would you have written them off as a nutcase back then?
Probably. Actually, there were some stoppers. There was, of course, Barney and Betty Hill, and there were other abductions too. But the problem was with these with them is that people are not supposed to remember them. And if they do remember them, they remember bits and pieces. And oftentimes the bits and pieces are not in a steady stream of what's happening, but they're all twisted around, and the bit and the piece are different in here and there. And so you hear these things and you can't really get a grasp of what's going on and all that. But once I began to learn how to do this through hypnosis with abductees, now by hypnosis is just relaxation, basically. And I learned how to ask questions in the correct way. And I learned how to teach abductees how to respond in the correct way, which is point by point by point by point. And not starting out on point 80 and then coming back to point 4 and then point 17, which they were doing in the beginning. So if they kept coming back to me, I would do the first several sessions, not on the things I remember. Oh, this happened, I got to find out about it. But on other things that happened to them in the same way with the same thing, and taught them how to remember point by point, specifically for the correct time limit, here to here to here to here. So if they're on board and they're on a table and the clothes are off, they had to take their clothes off and walk somewhere and get on top of the table. So we go back to when they're seeing this thing, and then they go up and then they go into this area. It's dark, and then I say, "Well, what happens next?" Well, we're walking into a hallway. I said, "Well, is it dark in the hallway also?" No, it's light in the hallway. And okay, well, you can see lights on the top, can't you? That's a direct misleading question, or leading question rather. I've asked that 1,000 times. Not a single person has ever said yes, which would make it fine. They all say no, don't know where the light is coming from. So I say, okay, now when you're walking in the hallway, where is this gray alien you said who was walking with you? Is he behind you? Is he maybe next to you or in front of you? Oh, he's next to me. Okay. Well, when you walk down the hallway, is it curved to the left or the right, or does it go straight ahead? Oh, it goes to the right. It's curved to the right. I don't care about what I just told you, but I'm training the abductee to remember things one point after another in the simplest ways imaginable.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they finally turn right into the room and ask them, well, is this room dark or light? Now this is in the very beginning. This is not later on when they learn how to do that. And this is when you get all the same reports. And I'm just asking them what's happening. I'm not telling them what they're doing. I'm asking, they say, well, I have to get on the table. I say, well, you can see the table's legs, can't you? No, table doesn't have legs. It's just a solid block that comes up. Yeah. And I say, well, are you alone there? You mean with just these people? No, there's other people laying on the tables. I said, well, how many other are there? Oh, there's about 10. Okay. I've learned over the years to be simple, straightforward, and then when I start talking about the aliens, then I can talk about, well, the alien who's standing over you, or I'm sorry, yeah, while you're lying on the table, can you see his hair? It's another fake question. The answer is no, he doesn't have any hair.
So what you're saying is you ask these leading questions, these false questions,
Falsely, right.
In order to ascertain what?
I want a minute by minute, point by point series of events that led from the time they were abducted till the time they were brought back. What they remember is just bits and pieces of the abduction event. They don't remember going up into the UFO. They don't remember anything like that. But once they begin, but it's in their mind. And what I'm doing is I'm not forcing, I'm allowing them to open up what's in their mind. And then they can remember things without even relaxing. Now it goes away, but this is by people from all over the world, which is, to me, still astounding. All saying the same thing in the same way and all knowing how crazy it sounds.
Let me ask you this, considering this background, this research, this contact you've had with people who've had contact, have you ever met knowingly or perhaps unknowingly or suspected that you've met a hybrid or an alien of some sort?
I'm going to make a circular aspect to this in a way. I have not known in person any alien. Have I connected with an alien who was abducting this one woman and who was living here? I did have a series of an ancient way of operating our systems now, something called AOL instant messaging. Yeah. They would send a message to you and then you send a message. And there was a hybrid who I talked with that way. I only had about 6 sessions with him. He was with this woman who he had been abducting. It was very interesting, very innocent, didn't know a whole lot of things. I could not talk about the ones above, as he said, the ones that were still on the UFO. I think I'm the only person in the entire world who talked with what could possibly be a hybrid.
Could you share with us some of what you discussed?
This happened like 10 years ago, and I tell you the truth, I don't remember so much, but it was just kind of common stuff, normal stuff. He was interested in the fact that I would say things that were sort of joking, and he wanted to be that way a little bit, and he tried it out once on me, and I told him it was a good start, and that was it, or whatever it is. But he seemed, everything about him was normal. Everything about him was human except for one thing. The woman who was sitting in her chair or whatever, who was the abductee, was under his control the entire time. And as soon as he left, she didn't know anything about it. Didn't.
Professor, are you now, or have you ever been, a member of the deep state spreading disinformation about UFOs?
I have not been. There are people who do that thing. First, they think that they're being correct, but both Bud and I were doing it the right way. And um, I was not interested in abductions originally. I just thought thought the UFO phenomenon was a thing in and of itself. They're crazy to talk about abductions. And I remember once, I've told this story many times, but since I'm now old and my brain has shrunk to the size of a bean, I can say it again and think it's new. I didn't deal with abductions at all. And I know there are a lot of abductions going on, but it's just too crazy for me. And one time I went to a conference in Evanston, Illinois, at the university, the college there, a Northwestern University. And J. Allen Hynek put on a conference, and he was the head of the government's UFO research area, and he does not believe in abductions at all. And he became a good friend of mine, and actually wrote the introduction to my first book. But this guy named Bud Hopkins was going to be there, and he's going to talk about the first serious talk about the abduction phenomenon. And I thought, as I sat in that room, should I stay there and listen to this gobbledygook? Or should I go out in the hallway with a friend of mine who taught who was a university professor who knew every single joke ever invented by every human since the beginning of mankind? I went out in the hallway and laughed for an hour while Bud gave the first talk about abductions ever. And when he was done, I came back in and sat down and went on with the conference. So a couple of years later, I got a phone call from a guy named Tracy Torme. His father was a famous singer, Mel Torme.
Yeah.
And Tracy was a Hollywood producer and done movies and this and that, and he was a friend of mine. And he said, David, he said, I found out where the secrecy is kept in the U.S. government in secret, and they're studying the subject, but I can't tell you on the phone. So he lived in Hollywood, but now he was in New York for something. So I came up to meet him in Central Park where we could talk, because there's nobody around in Central Park. Somebody they might have their ears to a wall or something, where he was at. So he told me it was a U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey Organization. This was the only time I have ever heard of that in terms of UFOs, because they deal primarily with waterways, and with rain, and things like that. They don't deal with things in the sky, and nobody's ever said that either. So he said, David, let's go over and see my friend Bud Hopkins. I said, oh, no, I don't think so. I got to go home now, and I got things to do, like watch television. And so he said, no, he's a nice guy. I like him. I said, no. And he grabs a taxi, pulls me in, and we go to Bud Hopkins' house. And as soon as I got to his house, he owned a house in the Chelsea district of New York City. I noticed that he had a Renoir drawing on the wall, a Degas drawing on the wall, other famous French Impressionists on the wall, other paintings, and then he was a painter himself. He had a huge amount of excellent paintings. He was a member of what they called the New York Society, essentially, and a group of artists. And he was fantastic, amazing. Here's where things meet that are out of your control. So now, talking to him for about an hour, a really, really nice guy, extremely intelligent. And he walks out with us out of his front door, and he says, we're walking a little level to get to the sidewalk, pathway rather. He says, what are you doing this summer, to me? I said, well, we've just had our first child, as it was. We just had a baby, and normally we would go up to Maine or Portsmouth, whatever, and but the baby can't be in the car that long, so we're going to a little town called Wellfleet. And he said, Wellfleet, I have a house in Wellfleet. I spend every summer in Wellfleet. When you come there, look me up. Wellfleet is a town that is extremely small. It was amazing, actually. So we looked him up when we got there, and that's how I started becoming Bud's friend, and then his closest friend in terms of the abduction phenomenon, and stayed with him for the rest of his life, basically, until he died in 2011.
What do you make of Roswell and Area 51?
I am the last human being on Earth who doesn't make with it. I do not think it happened. I think that it has led people way off the beaten path. I think they're looking for holes in the ground and for live occupants in caves or in studios or in airplane hangars or whatever. And all this has done is give ridicule, I think, to the UFO research community, especially to the abduction research community. I hate to say this, but I don't find the evidence strong enough to have this happen. And I've read enough about it to know that something crashed there. But there were things that the Air Force or the Army Air Force were doing at that time. Well, we were trying to get a hold of what the Russians were doing. You know, we had things up in big balloons and this and that and all sorts of stuff attached to it. And every once in a while, one of those things would fall.
You know, that's an interesting response from you, because some people would find it surprising that someone like you, who believes in alien contact and abductions, doesn't believe in Roswell and Area 51 and the aliens there.
If there was a crash at Roswell, we'd know it by now. It's the most important event that ever happened. Period. The most important event that ever happened. Period. Right. Doesn't matter what whatever else happened on Earth. This was the big one. The Air Force, let's just say, would pick up the pieces. Now, the Air Force has a certain amount of people who might be interested in studying it. That's not enough. They have to get important scientists, the most important scientists in the world, to come and look at this extremely advanced machine. Really advanced, beyond imagination advanced. And these beings, look at these things. How do they? There's no genitalia on these gray aliens. What do you make of? Now, you have to bring in serious people. You're not going to go to a 2-year college and get some guy who's got an AA degree, and it's not going to be that way. It has to be major scientists. Einstein, he was alive in 1947. He died in 55. One of the most brilliant minds who ever lived. And there's many others. And you have to bring them under a secrecy, et cetera, and they can't do it. They can't figure it. They die. Then you got to replace them with more and more. And then it's 15 years later, and you got to replace them more and more, and on and on and on. And even as we speak, they are still spending billions of dollars on this. They're looking everywhere. They've got this crash saucer. It's amazing. It's astounding. We'd know. Period. We'd know. And that is not known.
Getting back to the alien phenomenon, one final question for this segment. What is your assessment of the final outcome for humankind, considering what you've discovered in terms of what you say are alien abductions and contact? What is the final assessment of the final outlook for mankind?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I do not know the answer to that. I can guess two things. Aliens come and take over everything and dispense with humans. That would be one thing. Another thing is that aliens come and control humans in such a way that we become workers for them, or just do jobs for them, or whatever it is, but they're the ones in control. I don't know which one they're going to take over. I don't know which way the takeover will be, but I do know that after all these years of working on this thing, I've learned to fear it. I don't like it, and the more I learned, the less I liked it. And believe me, I much rather would have dealt with happy, good, kind aliens are here to help us. That's justice, not in evidence.
Some dire words there from Professor Jacobs on what is going on with alien abductions and his view on what may be ahead. Professor, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.